Let's get it going then. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Jay Nelson. I'm the Communications Director here at RRAR. As you know, we're here to further discuss the recent NAR settlement. It's been a hot topic for our realtor members since the announcement was made last month. So we wanted to provide an outlet where RRAR members could get immediate responses to the questions that you may have about the settlement. So we encourage you to please send in questions during this webinar. You can look for the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and you can let us know what's on your mind. My colleagues, Hillary Varner and Brylan Kaloji, they're here helping me monitor the questions. And we'll be sharing those questions with John and Dave throughout the webinar. Now, before we begin, we want to give you a quick reminder that if you're looking to stay up to date on the NAR settlement, local, state, and national associations have you covered. Here in Raleigh, you can go to the news and reports section on the homepage of rrar.com. NC Realtors has a page dedicated to providing updated facts about the lawsuit to its members. You can find that by searching NAR lawsuit on NC Realtors website. And finally, NAR will continue to provide updates about the settlement process for members and non-members, such as clients and consumers. That's competition.realtor. And we'll provide a link to all three of those websites on the chat. NAR also has facts.realtor. I think Brylan's already put that one in the chat. So keep an eye on those. Those will be some good resources on the state, local, and national level so that you can stay up to date on all three aspects about the NAR lawsuit. Now let's go to the speakers for today's webinar. Dave Phillips, CEO here at RRAR, and John Wood, current board member at Triangle MLS and a past president of RRAR. Fellas, take it away.
Thank you, John. Hey, wrong person. All right, sorry about that. Thanks for everybody being here today. We're really all just learning as we go along, and John and I have been paying particularly close attention to everything going on, of course. And we have a nice program for you here today, but really what we're hoping is that you are going to be the star of the show by asking us lots of good questions, because you've probably already read and heard and seen everything there is about the actual settlement and the terms of the settlement. But now is the time when, how does it apply? Where do we go from here? That type of thing. John and I have sat through so many webinars that have, we kind of fall asleep during at this point because we've heard the same things. We don't want to do that to you. We want to make this a little more interactive, and hope that you come up with some really good questions. I'd like to thank John for being here. He's one of our NAR directors, of course, past president of RRAR, and very knowledgeable on this topic because he's also a local broker and has to get to know this stuff just like all the rest of you do. So thank you for being here with us today, John. We have a few questions in advance, and we're got a little bit of material to give you, but we're going to try and lace in the questions at several different points and not wait to the end. So hopefully that'll work out well for you. I wanted to start off today by just kind of giving you the long history in a short amount of time, if you will. This has been brewing for decades, actually, and where we are today is a result of things that happened literally back in the 90s when we decided we needed to do agency disclosure. That was a new thing back then, believe it or not, for those of you who hadn't been in the business that long, where we had to suddenly tell our clients that we worked for the seller. There was no such thing as buyer agency at the time, and everybody was deemed legally to work for the seller, and we wanted to be agents, and that's all part of agency law that you've all learned in over the years. So that's how it's kind of started, and then right after that, the buyers started going, "Wait a minute, what do you mean you represent the seller? I want somebody to represent me." And buyer agency came out, and we thought that was the end of the world at the time, and that it was just going to blow everything up. But it didn't, of course. And today we can't believe that we never, there was a good point in our history where we didn't have buyer agency at all. So that fast forward to now, and what we're looking at is we've seen a couple things happen over the years that have really highlighted that commission issue that in the kind of the public side. So we had a bunch of big housing increases back in 2005, and then the most recent one in 2021, where the prices of houses rose so quickly, and buyers and sellers are going, wait a minute, look at these commissions I'm paying. It really highlighted them because they were increasing so quickly. And then we've been at war with the DOJ for many times. They just don't get the real estate industry. We're not sure why. We've explained it to them. NAR has at least many times, and they just don't seem to get how commissions have been paid. We created a system in MLS that was incredibly efficient for sharing commissions and making it nice and clean and transparent in lots of ways. But that wasn't good enough for the DOJ. It wasn't good enough for these lawsuits that came out. And so that's where we are now. It was kind of always wait a minute, why am I paying a buyer agency? Well, the whole the whole commission question is a chicken and the egg thing. Which came first? The buyer brings the money, the seller, does it. It's all done through the transaction is the bottom line. And whether the buyer's paying or the seller's paying is irrelevant. It's all been done through the transaction. But that's what the lawyers have seized on, is that moment, and have accused the realtor world of kind of fixing those prices and protecting our interests, when really what we were doing is making a very efficient marketplace where there was a clear offer of compensation, so everybody knew what they were going to get paid, which makes a lot of sense to us. So just put everything in perspective to where we are today. Just remember, we survived the invention of buyer agency. We survived the internet when that was another thing was going to completely ruin the business, and absolutely, and it didn't. We survived the Great Recession of the 2000s, and now we've survived the pandemic. This is all really not that big a deal compared to those things, and we survived those. And I have every belief that the Realtor organization and our members who will find a way to get this done and get back to some sort of normal marketplace once this all kind of blows through our system. That doesn't mean we can't pay attention. It means we got to work our way through it and collaborate and do things like this to try and make sure everybody helps get us through this to a more stable environment. All right, that's the brief history there. John, why don't you explain some of the reasons why NAR settled this case?
So I think NAR from day one has tried to find common ground to reach some level of a settlement. So this is not something that came along just from the verdict that occurred in October. For years, Katie Johnson, our legal who heads our legal department at NAR, has been saying we are open to settle, we are open to find common ground, and a lot of it is the resources that it has taken and the time and the energy. And I can tell you, especially in recent months, this whole settlement has consumed so many of us. And our goal for all of y'all is to not let it consume you. We're going to try to hopefully have you leave today with knowing a couple key items that you need to pay attention to. And the rest of it is all for the attorneys and for the MLSs and everything to kind of get some changes made. But many of y'all might remember back in October, there was a verdict, and that verdict ended up being over $5 billion. And in order to appeal that verdict, NAR and the other firms and brands that were involved in that, we're going to have to come forward with a bond in order to even appeal. And it became very apparent to NAR that we don't have $5.6 billion in assets. And so they started looking at, we've got to find a way to settle or to get the dollar amounts reduced to a level that they could actually appeal. And they worked out and found that they could come up with this proposed settlement. So that's kind of where we are. This could have gone on for many more years. Y'all might not remember, but this all started in 2019. And yes, we've been distracted for the last 5 years with other things in our industry, like wearing face masks and all these other fun things. But the reality is this dragged on for many, many years. It was like 3 years into it before it even became a class action certification. And then in October, the minute the verdict came, there was 20, I think there are up to 25 other lawsuits that have come out. Many of them are just identical copycats to this one. And this is where the settlement is really crucial, because it does combine all of the seller related settlements. It doesn't address the buyer ones, but it addresses the majority of the lawsuits that are out there. And that's really important. And it did keep, and it is going to keep NAR from declaring bankruptcy, which would look bad. Even if they could have come through it on the other side, we all would have gone, wow, what sort of organization we're part of that had to file bankruptcy. So we're glad that we got to this other side. A couple things that are specific about this settlement is that there is going to be a $417 million payment from NAR into the settlement pool, and that will be distributed however those attorneys and all of that have that figured out. There are many, many more attorneys are going to be involved than the ones that were in the case from just in October, because all of them that have filed these copycat lawsuits at some level will get some level of compensation out of this settlement. And the settlement doesn't end with what NAR is paying. You might remember that Anywhere, which is Caldwell Banker, Century 21, and many other brands, they settled our preliminary settled back in September, as did Remax, and then now Keller Williams and Compass and many others have found ways to go through a settlement process. Many of those are preliminary, just like this one is. We are expecting the first couple to actually go for their final hearing on May 9th. So we could start seeing where actually there's going to be some funds due out of some of those firms and brands. But for NAR, it's over a 4-year payout that they'll be doing this. And what NAR has promised all of us is that they're not going to come immediately running to all of our back pockets asking for money. They believe they've got the money to get this process started. And then the Budget and Finance Committee will be evaluating along the way of, are there ways to find money without having to go and raise dues? And we hope that comes to pass. But this is so much better and so much less expensive for all of us if this settlement can all go through. Now, what are a couple key parts of this settlement? One of them is there's some changes that had to happen. Timeline, we'll get into a deeper timeline later, but mid-August is probably what you need to be thinking about. Might be a little bit later, but that's probably when you're going to start to see the compensation disappear from MLS, which is what most of us in North Carolina need to worry with.
Thanks, John. Let's get to a couple questions here. Okay. Please type in your questions into the chat box so we can answer as many as possible. First question, what is the timeline that you just alluded to eliminate the compensation? So that was mid-August is kind of the target date on that. Is it only if the proposed settlement is accepted, or has the TMLS made a decision to eliminate by a specific date, regardless if it's definitely forced upon us or not?
So you're not having two attorneys sit here. So part of this is a little confusing to us, but part of the terms of settlement is there's several changes that have to occur during the settlement process. And one of those is the MLSs need to remove the offer of compensation within 150 days of last Friday. So that is actually in the middle of September. What I would anticipate is somewhere in August, you will see that disappear. There'll be plenty of notice and heads up about it. And it'll be just the display of compensation will be removed from MLS. Within the settlement, there is a talk about a seller can offer some level of compensation is the wrong word, but a concession to a buyer. And we are working on how that will be structured and looked, instead of just having it in comments or whatever. We anticipate we'll have a field, and exactly what that field will look like, we'll know a little bit later. There is going to be form changes coming out. And one of the forms that some of y'all have used in the past is Form 220. And in the past, it was kind of called confirmation of agency appointment and agency and compensation. That's now just going to be confirmation of compensation. And you will get that form out the 1st of July. And I would recommend go ahead and start using it. Go ahead and get used to using it between you and the other agent in the transaction. And then you'll be all set for when it does disappear from the MLS. You've already got the paperwork and all of that in place.
Somebody asked online for clarification. There is a July date. That July date was the original one. They talked about this having to happen, but the settlement was specific that it was 150 days from when they filed it, and they filed it last Friday. So it's been shifted back to mid-August when the changes have to be made. The MLS has 30 days, I believe, more to decide whether we're going to join the settlement and be part of it. And TMLS board will be taking that up next month. So we'll, all likelihood, be part of the settlement, but we haven't really discussed the options on that yet.
I would be surprised if any NAR governed MLSs don't participate in this, because we're going to open ourselves up for immediate litigation.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more, because we have a question on that. Now the question is, who is tracking the implementation of the changes, and how will the new changes be monitored for accuracy? I'm assuming you mean the changes to the MLS is my guess there. So the TMLS board is responsible for making those changes to the MLS process. Staff will, of course, be heavily involved in that. We have very talented legal counsel that will be monitoring it as well to make sure that we're complying with all the rules in there.
But we're going to have to figure out as an MLS how to follow a couple of other requirements, because one of the requirements is going to be, as our feed goes out, our feed cannot go to any other websites or documents that would then be displaying offers of compensation. So, Dave and I can't go out and start another little software company and have, all right, we'll get our feed from the MLS and then we'll offer the compensation through that. If we are found to do that, the MLS is required to turn off your feed immediately. Now, let me clarify one thing. If you are a firm and you are receiving a feed from an IDX feed from the MLS, you may offer your compensation for your firm listings only on that website, even though along with that could be listings from other firms, but the only ones that can offer compensation would be your listings. So that is the only place that we've seen where an IDX feed could be used to show compensation, only to the one firm whose website it is. Or brand, I think, is another way to put that. I think you'll see some of the national brands do that as well.
Great. Thanks, John. So here's another one. Will seller sub-agency commissions still be allowed to be advertised in the MLS?
Simply no.
Zero commission stuff.
Yeah. So I've heard people go, "Oh, we'll take a picture of a pillow on the couch and it has a number on it, or we'll do something." Nothing, and that's where the MLS will be monitoring things to make sure there's no games being played behind the scenes.
I've heard, we'll call ourselves realtor friendly or something like that in the comments. All that is going to have to be policed to be part of the compliance that we have to deal with as an MLS. So, all right. Could we put the compensation showing time, John? I think you just answered that. Right?
No products or byproducts of any MLS, including Triangle MLS. So showing time or any of the other services, the lot box services, none of them can provide that service if they are affiliated with in any contractually or any other way with an MLS. And that's true across the country. It's not just TMLS.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Let's get back, do a little bit of presentation here, and then we will get back to some questions in a second here. All right. What's going to happen in next month at the NAR meeting, John? What are we going to talk about there?
So our anticipation is that we will walk into the meetings in the first week of May, the first full week of May, and there will be policy changes coming out of the MLS policy committee, which I and several others from our local market are on that committee. So we're anticipating working on the rules to meet the requirements of the settlement, and then those will go to the full board of directors for the National Association on the Thursday of that week. We have been warned that there might be more rule changes that occur after that, and some rule changes might not occur that week because they're still getting clarification from the legal community. But I would anticipate we will come back with some rule changes And then what I expect to see is in the May and June meetings of the TMLS Board of Directors, as well potentially the RRAR Board of Directors, there will be some rule changes made at that point, all in preparation for the release of no display coming in August at some point.
Excellent, excellent. All right, we've got some creativity happening.
Okay.
This is good. Okay, can we put a link to our IDX website in the agent notes?
As of today, no. But there has been some question about would links be allowed in some level, and right now rules prohibit that. But we're going to continue to look to see whether that's a creative way. But I think the simple answer today is do not anticipate that. But we are going to try to figure out, is there any way that you can guide somebody to another website? But I think short answer right now is no.
Okay. All right, so let's get back to Form 220.
Oh, yes.
That you referenced. It said before the showing or before the offer, or what if they refuse to sign it?
Good point. So let me I'm going to go in a different direction before I go deep on that. There's been asked the question prior to today's meeting about, is the Real Estate Commission going to change their rules to allow a buyer's offer to include an offer of compensation tied to the offer of purchase? And the Real Estate Commission met on April 8th, just a couple Mondays ago, and they clarified to everybody that they are not in the process of making any rule changes. They did not rule out the chance that down the road they could look at it, but I think they're waiting to let all of this settle and this settlement actually to be finalized. But right now, if you're not aware, the Real Estate Commission has a rule, and apparently North Carolina is one of the few states that has this rule, so lucky us, that prohibits any offer of compensation in a pre-printed form. And that means that if you want to get compensation through Form 220, you're going to need to have that signed by the listing agent or the seller before you present an offer. Otherwise, a seller could accept the offer and not sign the form, and you could be up the creek with no compensation. So it is going to be very important for you to get that offer of compensation signed and confirmed. And then Form 220 is going to change dramatically for July 1, and it's going to actually have a checkbox in it of who is actually offering to pay the commission. And you go, well, of course, it's the seller. Well, not necessarily. Think about your standard listing agreement. You go and you ask for X amount of commission, and you agree to pay Y amount commission to the buyer side. That means you, the listing agent, is the one who's paying that commission out, as far as you're the one who's contractually obligated to do that. But if you've got a seller that has not agreed to pay a commission in your listing paperwork, but they agree to pay one, at the time of an offer, then they would need to be one signing that form, committing them to pay the money, since the listing agent does not have any agreement for that money. Hope that's clear as mud, but
it's actually clairvoyant, because that was the next question: is can you have is the seller responsible? Is the listing firm responsible? And the answer is it depends on how that's structured in the listing agreement.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So I hope that answered your question, David. All right. Let's move along. Will the compensation have to be a fixed amount and be specified in the exclusive buyer agency agreement, or can it be a fixed amount plus any extra bonuses from the seller, builder, et cetera? You might want to talk about the overages and that sort of stuff.
So compensation can be whatever a seller wants to offer to the buyer side. And if they want to have bonuses in there, if they want to have a fixed dollar amount, if they want to have a percentage. Obviously, we started seeing a bigger variety of that in the last couple of years than we've ever seen before. And I think that was just a precursor to what we're going to see moving forward. But what is clear is that, and we're going to probably talk in a more detail, but you're going to have an agreement with a buyer, and whatever that compensation is on that agreement, that is what the buyer has agreed to help you obtain, either from the seller or from the buyer's pocket as well. Now, if you get to a scenario where a builder is offering a bonus, and you go to your buyer and go, hey, there's a bonus of X amount of dollars. Would you allow me to get that? Or would you want to split that with me or something like that? If they agree to that, then you just amend your written agreement, because that has been a confusion that the written agreement is fixed forever and ever and all men. It is not. It is whenever two parties enter an agreement, they can agree to change that agreement. But what is clear is that you can't go in there, and if you said, I want A amount, and the builder is offering twice that amount, you can't take that money without the approval of the buyer. Your principal is the buyer, not the person paying the money.
Okay, thanks. Stephen asked what the name of the document was. I think he's talking about the 220.
220.
Yeah, I think it's the one you were referring to.
So don't go now and look at Form 220 and try to figure that out. Wait until July 1 because it's going to change pretty dramatically.
Okay. I'll take the next one.
Okay.
It says, who's getting the money from the settlement? Okay, that's I think we all know the answer to that. There will be, of course, it's a class action suit, and people will be solicited to join the suit and join the settlement and get their part of it. So it'll be any seller, based on what we currently have, from. Do you remember the dates? Certain years.
It's about 4 years back.
Okay. Any seller can join there and get a chunk of the $417 million, plus other monies that some firms have paid. So there'll be some for those, but the lawyers typically in these cases make most of the money, and their fees are in excess of $100 million for the law firm who won this case. So that's who gets most of the money, but sellers will get some if they join the class action suit.
So think about your Verizon settlement that you've started to hear about.
Mm-hmm.
And those of y'all who have Verizon, anticipate you'll be getting a credit of somewhere between $20 and $50 or $60 on a future bill. I'm not sure the settlement to most sellers is going to be much more than that money I just said from Verizon, but we don't know because it's how many people join the class. And that's why those postcards came out that angered so many people across the entire country. Is you can come join this. You just have to, commit to signing a certain thing. But I believe that we heard an attorney yesterday tell us that a seller can join at any time they are qualified because they did a transaction during this 4-year window.
Yep, exactly. And we're why are we a little better off here in North Carolina because of our buyer agency agreements? Why does that put us a little ahead of things?
So we were shocked, and shocked is probably even the calmest word, to find out there was only 18 states in the United States that actually had mandatory buyer agency. And for those of y'all who were around back when I was in 95, when this came out, as Dave alluded to earlier, some of us were actually happy for it to come out because we've been riding buyers around in our car, built a relationship with them, and then didn't represent them. And it was very weird. So we were, it was not that unhappy when it all came along. We had to just figure out logistics. The great news is there's nothing really changing for us moving forward regarding buyer agency besides kind of one difference. The Real Estate Commission says when you have first substantial contact with a buyer, you need to sit down and go through the working with real estate agents at that point. And then prior to writing an offer, a purchase offer with them, you must enter buyer agency. It wasn't always that way in North Carolina. For the first, 10 or 15 years, we used to have to enter buyer agency before we started working with that buyer. And that's what the NAR proposal is saying. So let's be clear here. We have the North Carolina Real Estate Commission rules, which we must follow. Nothing in the settlement changes that. But on top of that, as a member of an NAR and an NAR organization, you have to get buyer agency in writing prior to starting to tour homes. And touring is an interesting word, but we're assuming touring means taking them in the front door of any home. And we'll talk about open houses before we're done today. Yes. That's a little different.
Yes, we will. So let's go a little deeper on that because we've got a question here on that. If you're a listing agent and you're not going to be a buyer agent, and you want to show your own listing to somebody, you do not have to get a buyer agency form filled out. You can still do, just seller agency without representing the buyer, just like you always have. No change at all there. It's only when you're anticipating a buyer agency relationship and to be paid as a buyer agent that you really need to get that. And there's timing wise. Why don't you talk about the timing of when you need to do the buyer agency agreement?
So
it's a little confusing.
Yeah. So the buyer agency agreement, let's use that, for instance, let's use an open house since that's kind of an easier scenario. If I'm at an open house and consumers come walking in and they start walking around and we're having conversations about their house and their general conversations, everything is fine. No, nothing needed more. If a buyer starts cornering you and going deeper and starts wanting to divulge information about their scenario, not asking just deep questions about the seller, but about their ability to purchase that home, you need to at least pull out the working with real estate agents and explain to them who you represent in this conversation. And if you're the listing agent or from the listing firm, you more likely would be representing the seller at that point. And you can offer that if you would like my assistance to help you as a buyer's agent, and that would be, if you're not the listing agent, you certainly can offer it as dual agency, designated dual agency, whatever your firm allows within that regard. And even as a listing agent, you can obviously offer dual agency. But at that point, if you're going to get to the level of a deeper conversation and you're going to expect to be paid from the buyer side, you need to enter into a written buyer agency agreement at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good job. So I think it's also important to note that your agency relationship can change during the process. So you're not necessarily locked into just being the seller agent the whole time. At some point, it may be decided. At that point, you need to have the conversation and get the document signed. So it's it. Yep. Well, I have one more before that. This is a good one. Do you think it would be a good idea for us to contact all our sellers for this time frame and recommend they join the lawsuit?
I don't know. I'm not. I mean, there's no harm done, and they might appreciate the $25 or $50 or $100 they get out of it. But they've all gotten postcards. Don't kid yourself. They've all gotten the postcards. I'm not sure I would want to enter into that conversation and start having to explain to everybody all about it. They're big boys and girls, and they can read their mail.
All right, you guys are doing a great job with the questions. Keep them coming. John, do we see any changes coming to the listing agreement? So the list specifically, sorry, just scrolled away from me. Listing firm, and specifically what is paid to listing firm, and then separately what the seller is offering to the for a concession. Well, the new listing agreement states seller has the right to offer any or no concession to a buyer or buyer agent.
So one of my other fun duties is I'm also on the state forms committee. So as you think about over the years, that cycle normally July 1 is when the new forms come out. So we were done with our forms changes until the settlement came out. And then we got back together a couple of weeks ago and we went through the tweaking of the forms. And I was surprised how little adjustment the listing agent, the listing form really needed. And all we've really done in that is right now, if you think about it, it says total compensation to the firm. And then later in our listing agreement, it says what is being paid out to the buyer's agent, whether in form of sub-agency, buyer agency, or other. And all that's really going to get added is a tweaking a little bit of that's not going to be advertised in MLS. And then there is going to be something in there for the seller to acknowledge that they understand that offering compensation to a buyer's agent is their choice and it is not a requirement of this listing agreement. And that's going to be initialed. But other than that, it's going to work the same way it does now. So if you go in and say, my firm's commission is A, and we are going to pay out, we recommend we pay out to a buyer's agent, and you and the seller have a conversation about what that fee would be. The firm is responsible for collecting the total amount and then dispersing part of that to the buyer's agent on the closing disclosure, just like we've done today and yesterday and years ago. What y'all might not remember was 20 and 30 years ago, the listing firm used to get all of the money and then would write a separate check to the buyer's firm. I remember getting a separate envelope at closing. So things, we'll continue. So don't anticipate the listing side to be dramatically different besides your conversation with a seller and explaining to them what would you like to offer. And here's where I'd really recommend we all need to improve our skills of how to explain the value of a buyer's agent to a seller. And some people might say, oh, they're worthless, they're the other side. But the reality of it is I think a buyer's agent brings a lot of value to the table for a seller. They not only bring a well-structured offer, or we hope a well-structured offer, They also often will bring a pre-qualified buyer. They also help them through their buyer's remorse, their inspection remorse, the hiccup of whether the fence encroaches by 2 inches or not, all those sorts of steps. And if you didn't see the press release the other day, but our friends at realtor.com took out an article in, I believe it was New York Times or Wall Street Journal or both maybe, saying, we believe you should explore using a buyer's agent. And there's 171 tasks that you need to do if you're going to be a buyer and not hire an agent. And they're trying to just help everybody understand buyer's agents don't just show up, do a few things and leave and get paid.
Yeah, and buyer agents need to work on their value proposition as well. So
Absolutely.
not only the listing agent needs to be able to explain it to the seller, but the buyer agents need to be able to explain it. I think that may be the benefit of all this. You know, we actually gained a lot of benefits through COVID, and it was painful. We learned a lot of things. We do Zooms now all the time.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that's a good thing, but anyway, we learn a lot of things on this, and this is something we've talked about for years, is being able to express our value as buyer agents and as listing agents. So this hopefully will help us do that. I'll try this next question,
okay,
and you see if I screw it up. What if a buyer wants to be unrepresented? Do you think a buyer signature would be needed on any form prior to showing them property? So I'm assuming you're driving a buyer around, if you will, and they say, I don't want to be represented. I don't think anything really changes here. You accept the fact that you may not get paid because now without it being in the MLS, you better make sure that the listing firm accepts sub-agency or that you establish some sort of non-agency relationship and negotiate your commission as such. So it's no real difference agency-wise than way it would happen today. Unless you start acting like a buyer agent and doing things that a buyer agent would do for that client, then you could have implied agency, and then that's kind of undisclosed agency or undocumented agency or whatever you want to call it, secret agency maybe. Yeah. And then you could get in some trouble with the commission and everything. So did I get it right?
You did. I would just remember working with real estate agents is still required, and you need to say who you represent and get them to acknowledge receipt of that. And clearly we like them to sign it, but it just, if you present it to them and they refuse to sign it, at least you make that notation.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Okay, let me go back to another document where we got some questions. Go ahead. What you got?
New construction has come up, and what happens in the world of new construction, and is it going to change? I don't really think it's going to change much. Right now, majority of the builders, whether it's a realtor or not a realtor, sitting in that sales center, they represent the builder, and they disclose that multiple times to a buyer. So none of that's really going to change. They still have to do the work of real estate agents. I think I'm going to say that over and over, but from their side, nothing really changes. I think what does change is when that buyer wants representation, and this is where we need to be very careful with procuring calls. There are many builders that have policies that are very different than what you believe they are. Some of the builders have a policy of, if a consumer comes to their website and registers, then that builder might consider that they're the procuring cause of why they're coming physically to the site. So you need to know the builder rules. And this is the same thing I would have told you 2 years ago, and I'm going to tell you today. If you're going to take a buyer out to a site, and if they've already engaged with that buyer, with that builder, you need to ask them what their rules are, and if there is a method where you can be compensated or not. And if not, you and the buyer have to have that conversation of whether you're going to represent them or not in that transaction.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest change to your everyday business is you got to think about how you're going to be compensated now, where in the past we had such an efficient system, you didn't even really have to think about it. It was already there in the MLS. Mm-hmm. Quick clarification, we've sort of danced around it, but I wanted it to be stated specifically for this question. Can a listing firm still offer compensation to a buyer agent, or is it only the seller that can do it?
Still a listing firm can do it. So nothing changes in that. Nothing in the settlement changes. That is just the display of it is no longer in MLS. It is another means. And I would encourage all of us to make sure that our firms are finding a way to do that in some electronic means. Otherwise, a listing agent not only is going to get calls and texts and emails about, about question about the house, then they're going to have to answer to anyone who wants to show it, what is the compensation? So find a way to get it out there, and websites is going to be a great way to do that.
Okay. All right. Let's go with, I know that RRAR and TMLS are technically legally separate entities, but not practically. Why does NAR own any of or control the Triangle MLS? What can be done to divest ourselves of required control of membership of NAR to maintain access to TMLS? So we do wholly own, RRAR does wholly own TMLS. And because we own it, it is a realtor owned MLS, NAR has jurisdiction over it because NAR gives us our charter. In addition, NAR provides insurance for liability issues and stuff for us, that if you want that insurance, you have to follow their rules. So we've chosen to do that. We could spin off the MLS, sell it to a group of brokers or to a private entity, or create a separate corporation that's owned by somebody other than realtor associations. But anytime a realtor association has an ownership interest in an MLS, it is subject to NAR rules, because we'd lose our charter if we didn't abide by it. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. How does RRAR address complaints about individual realtor members from the public or RRAR members? Nothing's changed here. We have our code of ethics, and we follow the NAR procedures for having hearings and adjudicating different complaints, as well as arbitration. I will say that arbitration cases could get a little trickier because in the past we've had a clear offer of compensation through the MLS, and now we're probably going to run into some situations, and probably at the beginning of this change, we're going to see a lot more arbitration cases that because there won't be a clear offer of compensation, it maybe be assumed, or it'll be close. Excuse me, I gotta hit a button there.
Oh, sorry. I logged in another device.
Okay. And so nothing has really changed with that related to the lawsuit. It's still the code of ethics that RRAR processes here if somebody files a complaint or an arbitration request. I just think it might really increase the number of arbitration cases we have, potentially, if we're not good at implementing these changes. Anything to add to that?
No, I was actually logging in to see whether I could see the other question, but I can't. So
right. Does anything prohibit RRAR from having member requirements or rules in excess of the Real Estate Commission or NAR?
No, and we do have rules that are different than what are beyond what NAR requires. Our MLS has different rules because we offer products and services sometimes that are not part of the NAR rules. And y'all know that we offer forewarn and showing time and central lock and different things. So those are outside of the base rules that NAR has, and we have rules regarding how you use those tools.
Yeah, and there are some limits on those.
Yes.
For instance, we can't require everyone to put a lockbox on their listing. That's one of the limitations that we've talked about and would kind of like to do, but we're not allowed to do that. So there's some definite limitations to what we can do, but there are plenty of things that we do that are not part of the NAR rules. All right. When are we likely to know if state law regarding when a realtor must have a written buyer agency agreement signed by his or her client supersedes what the settlement stipulates?
Okay. Rule changes for North Carolina Real Estate Commission take 9 to 12 months typically. So I would anticipate that we might see some chatter from them later this year. And the first step I would anticipate we would see is them to relook to go back to the rule they had before, which required us to sign a written agreement at the time of starting to work with a client. That was the old rule, and I suspect they might go back to that. But right now, what they would tell you if they were sitting on this call is their rules are not changing. You are a member of NAR, and therefore, in addition to following our rules, you need to follow your trade association rules. And one little tidbit about why you want to follow the trade association rules in this, if you choose not to follow the rules, you are immediately subject to removing yourself from the protection of the terms of the settlement. And it feels a little harsh to me when if I make a mistake or I do something that suddenly I'm removing myself. But I think for the person who doesn't want to follow the rules, they have that right. But you're going to remove yourself from any protections from this and open yourself up to potential liability. And I know that a few of these attorneys out there would love to find us doing that. Now, will they find out one agent here and one agent there? No. But if they found an entire firm or entire market breaking the rules, they might come directly after us.
Absolutely. All right. Will there be a space in the listing agreement to address dual agency compensation?
Yes, just like there is today.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing changes in that.
Yeah. All right. What recourse does a buyer agent have if their buyer agrees to pay their commission and they want to meet a FSBO seller and buys that listing and telling us that they will still pay us because seller won't, and then they don't pay us?
Just like today.
Yeah, no change.
You have that ability to legally have your buyer agent agreement enforced, and you may hire an attorney and pursue that line of procedures, which could include suing somebody. And I realize that is not a common practice, but let me assure you, it has been done, and it has been done right here in Wake County more times than most of us want to know. It typically is done when the buyer goes rogue and leaves you and goes and buys another home. But there are times where you're working with them and they agree to have your help along the way, and then they don't pay you at the end. And yes, you have contractual legal rights. You cannot stop the closing, and you cannot necessarily stop the transaction because that's a separate agreement between the buyer and the seller.
Okay. We talked a little bit about this, but let's see if there's anything you want to add to it. How do the proposed rules affect procuring costs, especially concerning new construction?
Doesn't change it at all. Just need to be very conscious of making sure you're protecting yourself and aware of the rules. But it does change one thing, actually. Let me we've all felt this great protection for all these years that for any transaction we do, if Dave's a listing agent and I go to show his property and he's offered an offer of compensation in the MLS, there was confidence there that his firm was agreeing to pay my firm because we both signed agreements. Got to realize that goes away in this settlement, and therefore any agreement between two firms is going to have to be specific to that transaction. I don't see blanket agreements between firms, because there can't be a blanket dollar amount, because you might have a seller that's willing to pay one and another seller pay a different amount. So we're going to have to go back and use that Form 220 right now, and every transaction is going to have a compensation agreement attached to it. And if somebody doesn't pay, then yes, the legal world gets involved, and we get to pay attorneys for that.
How will buyer agents know if the seller will be paying the buyer's commission? Will there be another website that agents will need to go to find this out?
There can be, and we've kind of touched on that a couple of times, but I think that just as long as you understand, no MLS can be involved in facilitating that. But yes, there could be a third-party company that comes into the marketplace and says, hey, for X amount of dollars a month, you can log in, enter in the address of your listing, and enter in a compensation. And anybody else who's willing to pay us $5 a month, $50 a month, whatever they want to charge, would have access to that information. And do you expect to see that? Yes, I expect to see that. Do I think that's going to be the way it settles out in the long run? No, I think we're going to find better ways to do it. And some of those better ways are going to be, we're going to find ways to make sure that people are aware how we're showing our property.
Yeah, that
or showing our compensation.
gets to a question that you keep answering the questions before I ask them. So good job. And so let's expand on it a little bit, though. The question was how do we determine that? I think that's where we are right now, and that's why this is so stressful to everybody, is we haven't figured it out yet. We're all still working on it, and we've got a few months to do it, and we've got a lot of great minds around the country that are working on it. It's not just a North Carolina problem, or RRAR problem. It's a nationwide issue that we're having to deal with. NAR will be giving us some guidance. The state association will be giving us some guidance. And of course, we'll be looking at things here locally as well. And we will figure this out, just like we figured out the internet. We can figure that out. This is nothing, right? Yeah. So hang in there and have faith that everything's going to turn out fine. I know that's easy for me to say when we're talking about your compensation. And I get that that's a scary thing. But we've got a couple of months here. We'll have great minds working on it. And even if we don't get it right by mid-August, when the commission goes out of the MLS, we'll get it right eventually, and we'll figure it out, and we'll get to a place where a sustainable system is in place for everybody, so that we don't have to go through too much angst.
And the great news is RRAR and TMLS, we can offer advice and direction a little bit of how to do some of these things. We're not prohibited from doing that. We're just prohibited from participating in the actual act of sharing that compensation. So I do think you're going to find various people do that.
Okay. Yeah, somebody just made a yawn or something. Are we that bad? No, I'm kidding. Let's see. Do you see BICS needing to sign the compensation agreement since it is an agreement with the firm?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think that's going to become a firm policy. And, I can see that that's something I probably need to update for my firm, is what I give the power to. But right now, my firm, I give the power for all of my agents to sign their own listing agreements, as I think is common in many firms. So I think I'd be comfortable signing that, because the agent's going to know they're going to put themselves out on a limb if they sign it and don't follow through. Okay. That's probably going to be our policy. If you sign it, you got to make sure it happens.
Here's a good one. I'm not sure the answer to this, but
okay.
Could a seller pre-sign a form for buyer agent compensation and have it as part of the listing docs on the MLS? Not on the MLS, but
right. Yes, they can sign the form. Yeah. It just can't be displayed in MLS docs.
Yeah. So
just get around your head. Nothing can be in the MLS in any way, shape, or form that addresses compensation. Period.
Yeah. Are buyer agents allowed to bill their clients for commissions? I would say sure. Yeah.
And if you want to charge them by the hour, by the day, by the whatever, that is all between you and your firm, and how you can you choose to bill your clients. There are many models out there, and there have been many models for years. There's we think about the for sale by owners and the for sale by owners listed in MLS, which has happened. I've been in the business 35 years. It's happened for all 35 years I've been in the business. So some things never change. They come and go with the technology of how they're done. But, you can come up with your own model. And as long as it meets state law, that's the important thing. As long as it meets state law, you can do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we have a question that's, I think, really good. And thanks for asking this one. It says, I'm still not sure what to say to a former seller as to why this settlement has been reached. It makes it sound like we've done something wrong, but what?
Yeah. So we can say some things were done wrong. Happen to be not in North Carolina, because that's not where the lawsuits came from.
Yeah.
But in many of these other states that did not have buyer agency and didn't have our terrific forms that we have here in North Carolina, there was a lot of times where a seller, a listing agent would go in and get a seller to sign an agreement to pay X amount of dollars, and then they had no idea what that compensation was going to be back to the buyer's agent.
No transparency.
Right.
Yeah.
And let me give you a story here in North Carolina. We didn't always have it where it's broken out to what was being paid out to the buyer's agent. But what happened was it was discovered that there were some agents that were going and getting a listing fee and then offering a very low fee to a buyer's agent. The consumer seller had no idea that that was possibly affecting the attraction of buyers to their property. And the complaints came in at some point, and a lot of times it was an absent seller that was in that who had no access to MLS, no access to anything. They had no idea what was being advertised. And that's one of the reasons why we now have in our listing agreement where it's broken out of what the listing firm agrees to share with a buyer's agent. That's really what that form is saying right now is what of the total compensation, what we're agreeing to pay out. And the buyer and the seller and the listing agent agree to that.
Excellent. Will you talk about what just happened today?
Sure.
We didn't really go into that yet, and I think we've kind of breezed right by it.
Right. So I might read a little bit here because this all came out not 12 minutes ago, but probably 45 minutes ago. That on Friday we talked about started a clock ticking, and that's when the proposed settlement was introduced into the courts for the review of the federal judge who oversees. And he has given preliminary approval of the settlement. And that happened a few hours ago. The beauty of that is that now combines the settlement with a lot of the other lawsuits that are out there, which is what we were looking for and hoping for would happen, and it has. And it starts some timelines ticking. And it also is going to start a couple of steps. And if Hillary, if you can put up that timeline, that would really kind of help.
Yeah,
because that's it might miss by a week or two here or there. But so this timeline, and this is available at facts.realtor, but it goes into exactly what's going to happen. And as they said, on April 19th, they filed a motion, and in late April, well, that's already happened. And then by the middle of June, the MLSs are going to be required, and any firms that were not covered under the agreement who choose to participate under this agreement, they've all got to sign what is called Appendix B, or at least the MLSs, it's Appendix B, and we have to cover what is, that we're agreeing to participate. And then you'll start to see some of the practice changes starting in late July, and think about that as more the buyer agency signing of all of that. And then at some point in August, but no later than September 16th, the MLSs must be following the agreement from Appendix B, which is that display. Now, I cannot imagine that TMLS is going to wait until the middle of August. Two other things are going to happen is once those dates pass, then there's going to be a motion to support the final agreement that's going to be filed. It'll be open for public comment. And then anticipating in November would be that final approval. It might get pushed to December, but somewhere in there. And Hillary, you can take that down now. Yeah. But the element that we're missing that we haven't talked about is the Department of Justice and all of this.
Yeah.
So they have not made a formal or public comment about this settlement. There was one earlier this year or late last year, MLS Penn, which is up in the Northeast area of the United States. Yeah, the Boston area. And they were going through a similar type of lawsuit up there. And the settlement, there was a settlement reached, and the judge was liking the settlement, and DOJ sent a letter to them going, I don't like this settlement. I would like for you to reconsider. So we're anticipating something from the Department of Justice to come out to this federal judge in Missouri, but we don't know when that will happen. But I would anticipate that will create more chaos, but it might not change where we're going with this. Because the Department of Justice clearly wants to have their finger in all of this. And yes, as Dave said earlier, they seem to have this knack to want to break our organization apart and change the way we do business without understanding how we do business.
Yeah. All right, we got a couple more really good questions,
sure.
So we're going to try and go through. We're going to be a little over time, but stick with us. And
okay.
John, you can stick with us.
We'll
we'll get through these questions best we can, and we're always here to reach out to later if you have other questions. This one's easy. Well, not really, but the showing time, is it considered part of the MLS? Bob answered that yes, he thinks it is because it's you can access it through the MLS. The actual rule would be it uses MLS data. And so therefore, it's not a solution to the compensation sharing because it uses MLS data. That's the real reason. But yes, you can also access it through the MLS, which anything you can access through the MLS would also fall into that thing. How would clients and or agents report that different buyer agent commission amounts are offered to different buyer agents?
So that is a concern of mine, that transparency, while they're all touting this has actually made things more transparent, I disagree in the regards of the offering of commission, because that offer of commission could now be subject to an agent or a firm deciding that they don't want to do business with John Wood, so we're not going to offer him the same amount we're going to offer Dave. We want to do business with Dave. And so that is very scary. How that goes down, what that looks like down the road, that'll be very interesting. But I am very concerned about, we've eliminated a very transparent process that was open to all people, regardless of who they were, what their experience was, what the color of their skin, or who they worship, or any of that. Now suddenly comes back into play in a different line.
Exactly.
And that's been my concern from day one with this settlement.
Yeah, and it arguably is more challenging for the lower income buyers and stuff too as well. So
exactly.
All right, here's a good one. What about our current buyers? Do we need to get them to sign once again after all this gets put in place?
So your current buyers, if you've already got a buyer agent agreement with them and you should be good. If you don't have a buyer's agent agreement that states what compensation you're anticipating getting, then you maybe need to rethink a little bit of getting them re-signed. However, I do feel that if you're going to be entering a transaction with them later in the year, once the compensation offer has left our MLS, you might want to go back and make sure that they understand they are potentially more on the hook. We'll know a lot more. We'll have a sense of that come sometime in September of how dramatic that has gone. But I don't think that we're going to see a huge change in the offering of compensation. Yes, for a house that's going to sell in hours, that seller might choose to do one thing, but I think they're going to miss out on the ability to have the most qualified buyer and the biggest pool of buyers if they are not offering a compensation.
Yeah, I agree that in our market, this could be problematic compared to slower markets where the seller needs to be a little more aggressive. Okay, will we come across sellers who have already read the news and want to start refusing buyer agent commissions now? How do we address that?
Already happening.
Yeah.
And not as much as you think.
Mm-hmm.
Several of my agents have come to me and go, John, I haven't had a single seller even ask me a question about it. And they said, so I feel a little dumb bringing it up. And I'm going, well, I think we can go in there and tread a little bit lightly in the beginning of a conversation. And go, you might have heard. And they go, no, we really haven't. I go, okay, well, it's just going to change the way display is done for compensation later this summer and move on a little bit. But you need to understand we're coming up with what we're going to agree to pay them. And that is up to you, what we're paying that buyer's agent and what you're paying me. It's all negotiable.
Yeah. I actually had one of our members who was entering a listing the day after the settlement to say, but there's still the compensation field still in the MLS. So this is all evolving still, folks. So we'll figure it out. Let's see. We got a couple more.
I hope y'all like this format. I've been on just ask the questions because, as Dave said at the beginning, we've been on many webinars, and we were on one yesterday, and it was 55 minutes in before the first question got asked. So thank you, Cynthia.
All right. Based on the timeline, when would buyer agents have to have agency prior to showing? Would they have to have it prior to showing any homes?
So I believe that's going to be late July, and I think we'll have a better feel on that coming out of the May NAR meetings. So watch for future correspondence to come. And that will be coming from both RRAR, TMLS, North Carolina Realtors, and NAR. All of them will be blasting us with, these are the guidelines you need to follow.
Mm-hmm. There was a question about the timeline that we could share with the public. The one we put up is certainly shareable, and it's in within those links that we posted early in the chat. on all these NAR sites. Another one you can go to is facts, FACTS.realtor. Lots of good myth busting stuff there as well.
Plus the settlement agreement, this timeline, and many other documents are at the bottom. If you scroll to the bottom of facts.realtor, you will find that. And that is a public site. It is not hidden behind your password at NAR. So it's available, and it was intentionally set up so the media and anyone else could find details.
All right. One last question here. What is the justification for sellers to be compensated in this lawsuit? I think it would be that they had to pay somebody who wasn't representing them, is the way the lawyers have spun it. And they didn't know that. They weren't told that, or it wasn't clear enough to them in the states where this happened.
And this is all around a conspiracy that they're claiming that the agents conspired to charge a certain amount and to share a certain amount, and which we all know is not happened and is not what goes on, but it is the way that it was perceived. And because of the way they had documentation, sellers didn't have anything clearly in writing. And it's funny, that's where there was at least one company that got removed from the lawsuit because they presented their paperwork and showed that it was very clear. And suddenly, next thing you know, they're being dismissed because the attorneys couldn't overcome that. The one last thing, we did not cover the buyer side lawsuits that are still out there. Be aware, you will hear about the buyer side lawsuits as they go down the road. They are a much weaker case. They are a similar thing where they're not being disclosed with their agents being paid. And that certainly is true in some states, but there's a lot of feeling like those cases are much weaker and they might disappear, or there might be a small settlement at some point for them. Hopefully nothing crazy.
Yeah,
but nothing to North Carolina again.
Well, John, thank you so much for your expertise, and we're likely to be doing this again in the future as things develop. So stay tuned. Read your Monday Minute when it comes out. If you're not subscribed to that, you should read that. We're putting out as much information as we have available to us, and we want to keep you informed and make sure we're making all the changes with you being carried right along with us.
Thank you all for being here today. Reach out anytime to any of us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Have a great day.